Hi, and welcome to our podcast, where we'll be talking about memory culture surrounding World War II in China as a new reference point for our class, and how it parallels with Russia. We became interested in this topic after reading a review of the book China's Good War by Raina Mitter, which focuses on the political narrative around World War II in China. We had a great conversation with a Notre Dame professor specializing in contemporary Chinese and Russian politics, to discuss the similarities and differences in the role played by World War II in these two countries.
I'm Carrie Kazel, a professor in political science, and I work on the politics of contemporary Russia and China.
Professor Kazel talked about how, with Russia calling the war the Great Patriotic War and making it all about just the Russian or Soviet patriotism, even though there's a productive way of incorporating that into any sort of commemoration of war and other historical events, having that be the entire discussion makes it, I think she called it, a backward-leaning direction for the country.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point because I think hearing her say it in that way, it's very concise and it makes so much sense. But I'm not sure that it's something that we had heard phrased that way before. And so I thought that just, it's evident that she's given this so much time and research. And I felt like that was a really great way to put it and really interesting too in this greater comparison.
I think too, something we've talked about in class was the importance of education and how the narratives that the government distributes really reinforces and emphasizes what society values.
If we're trying to create a shared collective memory where all Russian young people, all Russian students are taught about the Great Patriotic War, the most efficient way to do this is through schools, through political education or patriotic education, through social studies classes, history classes, civics classes. And so we see that taking place within those traditional classes in the Russian context, and to some extent within the Chinese context as well.
The whole point about education is a really interesting point because I know Russia and China, we can pull really strong comparisons to each other, but we can also contrast it with how Germany and other European countries discuss what happened during World War II and how they have educated their people in a more proper way, as we would describe it, talking about facts and just talking about the terrors that happened and how bad their governments acted during that time period, to make sure that we would never go back there again and do the same atrocities. Comparatively, obviously, China and Russia are doing the complete opposite. They're making themselves look like the heroes and making themselves like they could have done no wrong, even though we know that's not the case.
Absolutely. And I think we even see that a little bit when we're looking with Putin and his government's treatment of Alexei Navalny and that nickname, the Berlin patient, and really just seeing how even today this World War II narrative and that cultural memory continues to be evoked, both to rally support and patriotism, but also to condemn political enemies. And so I think that's another way that it's still very much a part of contemporary Russia. And I think we see that in China as well.
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to a lesson that we've learned in class, that sometimes it can seem very small or nuanced to care about what words we use when we refer to people, or which stories we pay attention to, or which people get monuments. But I think when you look at it in the context of political narratives and which politicians are given prominence and acceptance in society, then I think you really realize the impact that memory culture can have.
And again, the perfect example of that would be Navalny, with being called the Berlin patient, like Grace mentioned, and the fact that Navalny is being charged with defaming a World War II vet. It's a very concrete example of how the past is used to, in some cases, cover up issues in the present and silence dissidents to help the authoritarian regime.
Well, all states, all political systems shape narratives. They all try to build support in different ways. They all have important historical touchstones where they like to appear as the victor, and they reimagine or reinvent history in a way that is going to build a base of support, glorify the past. And so that is not unique to China or Russia, democracies or dictatorships. All political systems reinvent these kind of narratives. But there is, Tessa and Grace, a danger in reimagining a narrative and disconnecting it from the reality.
Yeah, and I think that last point really emphasizes why these conversations are so important. It is easy to point fingers at Russia and China and their retelling of the past without looking in the mirror and seeing how America has also reshaped historical events. In saying that, as the professor stated, the real danger comes when countries completely disconnect from the truth to create a separate and new narrative, as was done in the case of Russia and China. With that, I would like to thank Professor Kasel for joining us, and thank you all for listening.